ahead, Francisco.
Alright. So, my name is Francisco Vivas, and today, I'm doing my project for Honors Texas Government 2306 with help from our lovely professor. And my project is titled The New Flavor of Texas Energy, an Analysis of Shifting Texas Energy Policy. So my research question for this project is as follows. With an aim to ascertain Texas's energy policies from 2007 to 2022, this study analyzes the trends of Texas's energy goals and compares them with the accomplishments and current goals. Picture waking up one February morning to find that the power is out and that your house is beyond freezing. So you bundle up in layers of blankets and you start to wonder, when's the power going to come back on? This was the situation for the majority of Texans during the 2021 Texas winter storm, which swept across Texas. This led to catastrophic blackouts, leading to millions of Texans without power for days on end. But why weren't we prepared? There are countries like Norway, Finland, and Sweden, and even states like Maine and Alaska that experience far colder temperatures, yet their lights still stay on. So this begs the question, why? Okay, so essentially the reason why this happens is because Texas infrastructure, many points of fact that Texas infrastructure is not built to withstand cold temperature, because we haven't had a storm this bad since like a century ago. So this begs the question, why were regulations regarding winterization so relaxed? And what was the policy going into the winter storm, and what was it coming out of the winter storm? My methodology for this project is as follows. First, I conducted a literature review in which I looked at the Republican Party platforms and analyzed their rhetoric before the storm. I only looked at Republicans for this project since they've been the dominant party for the last 20 years or so I haven't looked at Democrats, unfortunately. Then I analyzed ERCOT energy production statistics overall from 2007 to 2022, and I also looked at a closer, in-depth look, minute-by-minute look at energy production rates around the winter storm to see where the drops were. And then I reviewed GOP rhetoric and platforms and policies after the storm as well, since they're very different. Then I conducted analysis to see whether or not Texas has kept true to its word on whether or not it has followed its stated policies, rhetoric, and everything. So from reading the GOP party platforms, I noticed one thing that they all had in common. They were pretty much all the same, which keeps in line with Republican tradition. So the first thing I found was that they supported a very laissez-faire approach towards energy. They pretty much supported all forms of energy, like verbatim. They supported wind, coal, nuclear, gas, solar, everything. However, they also did say that they were against what they defined as overzealous environmental activism. The second point that I found was that they wanted to cut red tape. They wanted to remove as much legislation, regulation as possible. They wanted to remove subsidies, and even back in 2010, they were against electric vehicle mandates, which is interesting, even all the way back then. And then lastly, they wanted energy independence. They wanted independence from international organizations, governments, the US government, and other states, which is part of the reason why the blackouts occurred. I want to go back to that second point really quick with removing subsidies. After doing some research, I found something called Chapter 313, which was passed in 2001, and it ended in 2022. And what it essentially did is, according to the comptroller, it allowed public school districts to offer tax incentives for businesses that invest in their communities. Here's a list of the different types of projects that the school districts are allowed to give tax breaks to, including clean coal and other energy projects, renewable energy generation, nuclear energy, and also Texas priority projects worth more than $1 billion. So what's interesting about this is that despite the tax benefits ending in 2022, companies are still allowed to receive these benefits 10 years after the provisions ended. And more interestingly enough, out of the 191 projects that were submitted, that were accepted, 101 of them were submitted by oil and gas companies. So now if we looked at what happened before the storm, let's actually look at the storm. ERCOT and some federal authorities did some simulations on whether or not we'll have another winter blackout because of winter storm. And they found that there is a 30% chance that given another winter storm like this one, there's potential that the power grid will run 9,000 megawatts of the low demand. But what does 9,000 megawatts mean? We don't have we don't know what that means. So let me show you. So during the winter storm, you can see that there is a massive decline in energy production. Right about here, coal and gas failed at around the same time, around 2 a.m. And then nuclear later failed at around 5:30 a.m. right there. And there's also a slow decline right here, which is attribute to wind energy, which doesn't have an obvious start because of how wind energy works, but overall it just had a very gradual decrease. Coal, oil, and nuclear also contributed to this, but not as much as wind, at least with this section right there. Overall, there was a 6,000 megawatt drop in this day alone. However, over the entire winter storm, it was about a 9,000 megawatt drop, which actually aligns quite well with the ERCOT and Federal Authority simulations. So because of this massive power drop, ERCOT estimated that about 70% of Texans went without power for varying amounts of time. And that is actually around 21 million Texans in Texas. So that is completely unacceptable, and Republicans agreed, which is why after the winter storm, they changed their tune in their approach to energy policy, with the main thing being reliability. Now, reliability was the single biggest change, besides pretty much the only thing that changed between the 2020 and the 2022 platforms was pretty much this word alone, along as well as some semantic differences. But pretty much, this term is a remnant of Republican rhetoric immediately after the storm, where they initially blamed windmills for causing the blackouts, which is partially true. As I showed you earlier, every form of energy failed in Texas, pretty much. It wasn't just windmills, so this just goes to show that don't listen to your favorite political personalities, they're lying to you, regardless of if you're left or right, because everyone has something to say. Alongside reliability, outside of the actual legislation, they also implemented outside the platform, they implemented some legislation that expanded consumer protections, but through the form of price controls, because some Texans were charged ludicrous rates, like their rates went up like 2,000% during the winter storm, which is insane. They were charged so much money. And it also increased transparency between the government, corporations, and consumers. So now we will see whether or not Texas actually kept to its word on whether it has followed through in its policy. So first I'll be looking at its laissez-faire approach, I'll be looking at its attempts in energy innovation, and I'll be looking at its attempts at removing subsidies. So first we have the laissez-faire policy. Turns out they've actually done a pretty good job with this. They pretty much, from 2010 to 2020, they pretty much let every single form of energy have a fair shot at being economically viable and trying to remove hindering legislation as much as possible. In fact, it's done so good that from 2010 to 2020, wind has skyrocketed from basically contributing almost nothing to contributing about a quarter of Texas energy in the state. And we are actually the leader in wind energy production in the entire country, even beating California, which is very interesting. So it's safe to say that was a pretty good job. Next, we look at its attempts at energy innovation. Like I said, we're #1 in wind energy production, so it shows that we've done quite a bit of innovation and new energy building over the last at least 10 years or so. However, in the party platform, they also mentioned that they want to look at what's called molten salt reactors, which is very interesting because this is a relatively unknown technology, which is a type of nuclear reactor that is potentially safer, that is potentially more cost effective, and it produces waste that lasts for significantly less time. Traditional nuclear waste can last like tens of thousands of years. This kind of waste only lasts for a few decades, so it's significantly safer in the long run. This is a relatively unknown technology, so the fact that they actually mention it verbatim in their platform shows that they've actually done their research, which probably shows good news for the future, I will say. Lastly, there is the issue of removing subsidies. Now, as we showed earlier, Chapter 313, they didn't follow through with this at all. It was pretty much a total failure, and pretty much both Republicans and Democrats unanimously agreed that this was a very bad idea. Interestingly enough, of all the companies who applied for projects, only 2.5% of all applicants were denied. So it goes to show that if you just said pretty please, you pretty much get money for 10 years. So in conclusion, we found that from 2010 to 2020, Republicans have pretty much stayed consistent with their rhetoric, their policy, and everything regarding laissez-faire, reducing regulation, and energy independence. The winter storm blackouts were caused by all forms of power, including wind, gas, oil, nuclear, coal, everything. After winter storm, Republicans really started advocating for reliable forms of power, which can also include wind with winterizing turbines. And that we've seen that Texas has actually done quite a lot of what they said they would do, except for the subsidies part, which resulted in over-generous tax breaks. Thank you.